Hey, Matt.
Hey there.
Hello. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Doing pretty well. Everybody else?
I'm all right.
We got on here so far.
Matt,
Um,
Rohit. It's early yet. It's only 7:29.
29. I'll wait a couple more minutes.
You're just the early bird because you're the
Yeah, well,
the chair.
sometimes I think one of the times you had to enter a code, which I didn't realize, and so then I was scrambling to find the code. So this time I thought I'll get on early and I won't have to worry about that, but I didn't need a code.
Yeah. I hate that kind of panic. I had a training today from 1 to 4. Oh, that was fun, staring at the Zoom. And but I couldn't get on for the first 10 minutes because the login credentials were messed up.
Oh,
Whatever. I was trained. I'm now trained.
good for you. I'm glad to hear that you're trained.
Oh, so over it.
You know, one of the last meetings, I don't think it was this, but maybe it was a subcommittee meeting. I just did my picture and I was much happier. I think it's so distracting having to look at oneself. I do not enjoy it. I don't want to look at it. I do not enjoy it.
Mm.
So, anybody else join us? Oh, hello. Neil's here.
Now we got people.
Oh, we got
We got
people.
Neil, we got Robin, we got Julie.
We have
got-
both Julies.
We have Abrams. I'm not seeing Julie G. Oh,
If you're only gonna have one Julie, it should be G. I'm sorry, guys.
she's coming. I have a feeling she's not. I don't think she or Ed are gonna miss it.
No, I
And
talked.
no. Yeah, she was just editing the doc this like very briefly. Hey, Jeff Lave.
Brian's here too. I'm gonna keep my video
Know
off
it.
since I'm eating dinner.
You didn't tell me Jeff's on the call?
Is who?
Jeff Lave. Yeah. And Ellen, for my section, I have a 2-slide PowerPoint. So will I be able to share the screen, or is that only the host that can do that? Do you know?
No, I think you can.
Okay, very good. So, finishing up dinner.
But did you send it? Yeah, I think if you hit share screen, does that not
Right.
work? No.
I didn't want to try now. Matt Trellinger is, you think I can share screens? I think it depends on whatever settings he had done. Well, whatever, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Perfect.
Let me
Okay.
just double check and
Sure,
yeah,
thank you so
yep.
much.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you so much. Great.
All
Good to
right.
see you, Neil. It's been too long.
How are you doing? You got some gray hair there. Where'd that come from?
See, it's been too long.
Needles is open again, by the way.
I noticed that. We're overdue.
I'll be in line. Be glad to do it.
Oh, she
Okay, Julie's
is.
here. Julie's here. All right.
Okay, now we can crank.
Now we can take roll. How about that? Let's start with the roll call. Brian,
Yes, I'm here.
Julie, A,
Here,
Julie G. Here. Susanna,
Yes, ma'am.
Haya,
Yes, wait, yes, I'm here.
and Jan. Is Jan here? No, okay.
I just talked to her too earlier, so she should be.
Okay, maybe she'll be getting on. Let's get started because we were
Is-
lucky enough to get
Is Ed coming?
oh, I'm sorry, Ed has COVID. So and he said I could tell people. So
oh, I'm so sorry. Tell him how he feels for. Is this breakthrough? Oh my gosh.
That'd be
Well,
breakthrough.
yeah, I'm sure he's doing okay. He said he's much
Oh.
better today than he was a couple weeks ago. So
Oh, poor guy.
anyway, I've been texting him. He's communicating. He doesn't, I'm sure he's not feeling great, but he seems
Oh,
to be on the mend.
poor darling. Oh.
So anyway, Neil Weinstein is with us and he's going to kind of give us an update on what he's been working on.
How long do we have tonight?
Total about a half hour.
Okay, great. So I have two things that I'd want to present to you. And then we can talk about the schedule if that's okay. If I could get the screen. So the first is some suggested language to codes and ordinances. And this is more of something for discussion points rather than implementation. And we put this out the other day and Doug and Matt were very helpful in pointing me in the right direction on a few things and had some good comments. And came up with, I believe, like 13 considerations or recommendations that it would be good for the committee to take a look at that could create into a code. So these are written as more technical recommendations. Are not written for an attorney or a code writer. That's a effort to do that, but it's really focusing on some of the technical issues. So what I'd like to do is just briefly go through them. Just take about 10 minutes, and if there's any major discussion, just give that another 5 minutes. And if we want to keep going, what I would ask is I'll send this off to the committee like a spreadsheet format, and if you have any comments or suggestions, just put them in that format, and then we can track them and see how they've been addressed. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Sure, but go forward.
Okay, so one of the big things to get people to discern is what new construction means. So I think it would be good for a new building construction, and then also new site or impervious construction or grading. And those two distinctions are very important. So the county really limits, I think it's 35% lot coverage for buildings and structures, but there is no limit right now in the county, unless you're subjected to stormwater management, to patios, drives, or open that's related to, or maybe not related to, a new building or structure. So in other words, you could go out tomorrow and pave your whole lot if you wanted to. And so I think that should be addressed. And that really brings down to number 3, number 2 or 3, where we talk about the storm events to be used. It's a little bit complicated because just saying the 1 year, 24-hour storm event of 2.6 inches, these numbers are going to change over time. If climate change thing that's happening, there'll be more intense storms that'll be reflected in this 1 year, 24-hour storm. So this is going to go up. So I think tying it to the actual storm event rather than give a specific just would be wise to kind of do that. This next part is if you are going to build something and increase the impervious a lot, we should have some management of that. And one thing is that is relates to 3 and 4 is that we should really be, if there's any major construction, let's say if it's over maybe an area of like 400 square feet, which would be a small, 20 by 20 area, that you may look at. One is doing infiltration testing. And my guess is most of the soils that you have here won't percolate very well and will be because they're urban soil. Really be doing more of a detention of that amount of volume.
Neil, you keep going in and out a little bit, and I don't know why.
It may
Your
be
sound.
because, there's multiple people on the line. So
Oh,
but what I can do is I can switch to an ear. This might take a minute to do.
I mean, we should all be on mute while he's talking, right?
yeah.
Let me try that. Plus the microphone isn't that great. Does that help you a little bit more? Yes. No?
We'll have to see. We'll have to see, but it might be better.
Okay. So anyway, with that is skip back to talking about infiltration. So what I'm trying to say here is that when you bundle up these last 2 or 3 items, we want to capture a certain amount of volume, which is reasonable. We want to try and infiltrate that. If we can't infiltrate it, we want to detain it and release it over a longer period of time on the lot. Next thing is drainage direction. We don't want to have people taking their roof leaders or grading part of their lot and changing the direction of the flow. So all of a sudden your roof leader or the way you graded your patio goes right to your neighbor's basement window direction. So we want to have that reviewed by the town engineer. We want to also have some way to dissipate the energy just from downspouts or gutters or off a parking area. And we want to keep that at least about 5 feet of the property line. We had a discussion about this, and you want to have a little buffer. You don't want it going right to the property line, because if it is a problem, it occurs on your property and not your neighbor's property. The next couple ones are pretty cut and clear and dry. And we talk about curb cuts for sump pumps lines. We don't want to have that, or discharging sump pumps to sidewalks, because it's a hazard, especially here when we get some ice storms or it gets a little cold. One of these, and we should ask people to clean and inspect their drainage pipes and infiltration devices at least annually. And which brings up the question of, with all of these, is how are you going to enforce some of these regulations? Do you have someone check it? Do you self-document it? So that's something to consider. And then New driveways or additions to driveways should be permeable pavements. New swales should be bioretention swales. And by that, we want to have them vegetated so they slow down the water, because a grass swale can actually generate a lot of runoff from it. And the last part, 13, we talked about a limit of impervious surface, which I don't recommend because it's a little bit inequitable, and it's a lot of lots of when we talked the other day, they could be vegetated lots because the slope is so steep that they have a lot of runoff. So, and that's a pretty onerous requirement to limit the impervious surface. It's more of how you're going to manage it, one, how the feasibility of doing something, and then 3, how you're going to maintain it over time, and who's going to ensure that it's maintained over time. So do you have some questions on this that we can go, some big questions? And this is, like I said, it would be, I'm going to send this to you with the table, and you can put your comments next to that. And it would be great if you could gather them as a group and send them back, and then we can kind of finalize this list.
Can I ask a really stupid, obvious question, probably, Neil? And quick, it's an easy one.
You can ask an intelligent question too.
Okay, probably not, no, above my pay grade. So many of these things are, I'm assuming that existing status quo homes that aren't being renovated, rebuilt, et cetera, would be grandfathered in, because a lot of the things that are proposed are obviously a good portion of the town's in violation of that. So I'm just assuming, but correct me, I just want to confirm that curb cuts for drainage pipes, et cetera. I mean, that's a norm in a lot of the older meaning like 1950s or earlier homes. So and among some of the other things. So is that correct? I guess that's a more fundamental question. I was assuming so. I just want to make sure so, because that would be,
The answer is maybe.
Okay.
So we've done some work in some communities where they've cut the curbs already. So it's kind of difficult to go back to someone and say, we're going to close that curb cut because it's a public hazard and you shouldn't have done that. So that's kind of something that I think that someone has to decide politically if that's a good thing or not.
No, thank you.
Like I said, these are more technical and more, A plus B equals C rather than, I've had this leaky roof for 10 years and it keeps leaking, but I'm just gonna let it go.
Thank you.
And please feel free to ask. Don't feel that a question is not a good question.
Anybody else?
If we go back to the impervious surface question. In our last meeting, we had a lot of energy around that as a metric, but you're pretty negative on that as a metric. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Not as a metric, but as a kind of a constraint. Because it's not, to describe like what creates runoff, it's the surface, easily the slope and the type of soils. So you could have a grass surface on a very steep slope and poor soils, it generates a lot of runoff. Whereas you can have a flat surface and the energy is dissipated and it's a sandy soil, you may not have much runoff at all. So when I talk about percent,
but not a flat surface that's impervious.
Well, no, but at the end of it, you can buffer it. So if it's totally impervious,
I guess
if it's totally impervious,
I guess what if you don't use impervious surface as a metric for where to constrain building, then you're gonna actually have to go to a direct measurement of runoff.
yes, but so let me rephrase that so I don't confuse myself here too. So an impervious surface, for all intents and purposes, is going to have almost complete runoff because water can't get to the soil below. But a grassed area or vegetated area typically doesn't have as much runoff or potential for runoff. So I am not really for direct measurement unless it's a bigger lot. Because the models that are set up for stormwater are typically used for bigger watersheds than your, 1/10 of an acre or 1/8 of an acre lot. But it's the tool that we have that's used for engineering reviews. And so if you are required for stormwater, then you have to do those type of calculations. What I'm trying to say about the percent of impervious is that I would avoid restricting it because these are all residential houses and there's some extents. I'm more for mitigating the imperviousness.
Right, so you're talking about a restriction as opposed to a trigger for a requirement to measure and
So
abate your runoff.
I think you should have a trigger. So
Okay, so maybe that's where I was confused. Got it.
Right. So let's say, it may be something reasonable like, 10 by 20 or 20 by 20, which is 400 square, which is essentially the size of an addition, a 20 by 20 addition. But on the ground, on the surface, because that's enough to start to create some runoff. So if it's, you would maybe say if it's directly connected impervious area, meaning that, let's say you took your driveway and you made it a double driveway, and that would be connected to an impervious area. Whereas if you had a patio and it was 10 feet from your building and it was surrounded by vegetation, it would be disconnected. But that's a crossing the I's and T's. But the bottom line is, I think you should have some type of threshold where things kick in.
Right, and I think at least in the draft version, that was 40% the last time I heard of it, as a way to trigger to make sure that you then have to have an abatement plan. For all the
Maybe
water
not
being
so
triggered.
much the percentage, but I think in some square foot area would probably be reasonable. Because you could have the small percent of a large lot. Let's say you had a double lot or triple lot. 10% of that is a lot more than 10% of a single lot.
But in some ways, it shouldn't matter. And we're looking for a proxy for runoff.
Right.
In the absence of direct
I think
measurement.
I think having a instead of the direct measurement, I think having some minimal square foot area.
Yeah, no, I think that's the draft. That was the draft regulations. And Ellen, catch me if I'm not right here. The draft regulations was there's a minimum square foot addition when and if that is then triggered over the 40% impervious surfaces on the lot, then you would have a requirement to abate all of the additional rainwater.
I think that's, and which thing are you referring to? When you say the
construction or the addition regulations that we've been working on that Ed's been taking the lead on.
oh, yeah, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Julie G, does this sound right to you?
Yeah, Ed's not here, and I think Julie is here. Julie?
I
Yeah,
know,
so,
Julie.
no, I think Michael is correctly remembering the,
Yeah.
what we were essentially in the earliest phases of considering. This is a very difficult issue and we're not settled yet. So we're, I think we're circling around that issue. And I think Neil's suggestion that we use a threshold related to the concrete reality of the addition of the impervious surface in absolute terms is one way to, we're certainly going to add that into our consideration.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're looking at is how different regulations would affect different size lots and different parts of the community. And that's what we haven't,
Right.
We're running some data right now and we haven't quite digested all of it, I guess. because it can have a very different impact in certain parts of the town.
I think that, Ellen, I agree with you, is having something that's equitable. You know, if you have a big lot or a smaller lot, it should have the same effect.
How do you think equity should be defined here?
Well, if you had a large lot and you had 20% coverage, that you may have a small lot with 35% coverage, and the effect of that larger lot may be more impervious, a lot more impervious than the smaller lot. It might have a
By
contribution.
square footage, but not by actual
square footage.
runoff,
That depends. It's hard to answer that as a blanket question.
because of soils and slope and all the rest of it.
Location, yeah, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I guess equity for me would be the layup, the physical topography of your land you don't control. Right? So if you've got a really sloped land, you've got really crappy soil, you can't do anything about that. On the other hand, if you've gone up to 60% impervious, you've made those choices. And so I think I want to it'd be really good conversation thinking of what equity would be in these environments.
So I don't think we're going to resolve that question.
We are trying to figure that out.
But
Well,
I guess one possibility would be that the trigger percentage varies by lot size. And I'm not advocating for that right this second, but I'm saying that is an option to address these concerns.
No, I mean, you could make the linear programming and all that kind of good stuff. Make it come up with some formula that in a spreadsheet, but that may take a little bit of thinking to do that. And so you could essentially do something like that.
Right.
That's feasible to do that. That's mathematically it's capable of creating an error, a comparison of my lot's 20% or my lot's 30%.
Right.
Or my lot's flat and your lot's a steep hill.
You could do that, but it would take a long time to do that. And figure. But
Yeah, we're just yearning for simplicity here, and it's you're not helping us.
Yeah, I think we have to remember, as well as the equity, we want to have something that's administratively feasible and easily understandable. And so, I think there's a lot of things to balance here. And there aren't many guideposts because nobody, to our knowledge, has really forged ahead and provided us with good models on this. So
there are not a lot of good models because regulatory wise, usually people like things very simple, and that's just part of right now's technology. There's all kinds of complex technology, but it's applied to these areas. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but people try and do it. I have 6 minutes left on your agenda.
Okay.
So I want to just go over some of the master planning. So I don't know, let me see if I can share my screen again.
Neil, if I could just have you knit together some of these things you have talked about and will talk about. My understanding of your final report is that, or your final product will be the recommended code changes that we sort of consider. These master plans you're going to go through, some narrative, and the dashboard that we are going to sort of provide some user feedback on the 9th.
Correct.
Is that sort of that's what the center's contributions to the town will be? Is that sort of are those the pieces?
Yes, I'd like to take the code part. I'll send you a table. Put any comments in it, like, what about this or that? And let's see if they're answerable. And that'll be a deliverable. They'll have a small narrative before it, explaining what it is, the process went through, and here are the 10 or 12 in their final format. So that's a deliverable. Rain plan part and that part of their workshop is a deliverable. And then this part here on the narrative that goes with the master plan is a deliverable.
Neil, can I ask a question? This is something that we have really wanted sort of from the beginning. Somebody, does everyone have theirs off on mute? Okay, thanks. And that is, from the beginning, we wanted to isolate the clusters, and we think we have found the clusters, and you have diagrams with the clusters. So when we actually get to the stage where we try and have the most impact on the most houses, lots, what would be helpful is if we had not the term generator, because in many cases there aren't generators for.
I see, sorry, I think Doug Lohmeyer, one of his two things is not muted, if you can try, because I'm getting echoes.
Yeah. Hello? Okay. So in each of these different watershed areas, if we could isolate 2 or 3 places, not as punishment, but just sort of, if you had some impact on these lots, this would impact the most people, that would be really, really helpful. Because it's very hard for us. We can see who's saying they're getting flooded and where the water is, and we can look at hills, but it's hard to know where it's likely originating. Given the water flow. I know you have diagrams of the water flow, but sort of, I mean, just for an example, I went back to the block of Cumberland from Devon Lane up until Surrey, and on the south side, there were no generators. Well, there are multiple people getting flooded there, so where's the water coming from? That's my question.
Neil,
Neil, I think you're muted.
there we
How
go.
about now? Someone
Good.
muted me.
Yeah, I think we're getting some feedback from you when other people are talking for some reason. So I had muted it while Ellen was speaking. I'm sorry.
That's okay. People like to mute me generally. Well, first of all, the term generator, that was a nifty little thing that we made up for this project because this is a little bit unique. Let me just explain kind of this master plan. It's not really a traditional master plan, but when we started getting into this, typically a master plan that you would see in a land is a land use plan, and it's a blob, and it's a, here's the commercial transit center. And then when you read about it, there's some nice renderings of people and they're walking around and doing this and doing that. And it's very broad brush. For this, what we thought is when we looked at the town, we said, that's not really a good approach. That doesn't do much for you here. What would help is we really look at these micro watersheds and see what's happening in them, what's cumulatively making these problems. So we used the data that you sent us on the survey. We used the videos and pictures that you sent us. And then we went out in the field and tried to verify for this. And so we divided everything up into I believe there are 40 different little sub watersheds here. And if we really don't have the budget and time in this effort to go through them, all of them. So we picked 4, which we felt were pretty representative, that had some potential gray and green infrastructure solutions, and we tried to focus on that. So each of those areas, what we did is we kind of looked out and we made notes on. So this is the result of, for example, around Dorset and Essex, I guess it's the 4900 block. And we looked at that and said, hey, what's happening here is you have about 10 acres of water that gets generated down this blue line here. Then we have some other drainage that comes off the side. So it's trying to be representative of the issues that you would find within the town as much as possible. And that way we could illustrate some potential solutions using gray or green or a combination of both. So it would be very difficult. I know we had this one lot, and I'm not going to name the lot, but when you and I were on the phone the other day, we talked about it really is the big generator of water. It's very difficult for us to do this without doing something very detailed and time consuming. And then it may or may not pan out because there could be other downstream lots or downslope lots that are also contributing. Maybe they're helping to accelerate it because the swale is that steep in that area rather than being farther out to the side and more spread out. So I don't think that we could really do that and come up with it, say, you know, we could have some conjecture and say it could be one of these two, but I don't think it would be always that accurate or, you know, without doing some further really detailed engineering investigation.
Do you see something like that in the next phase?
So I think the thing is let me bring up the next screen. Let me see where I hit it. Getting better with this. So for here example, what we proposed is some type of bioswale. And then with some check, you know, with probably stone line because there's so much water that comes down through this area and through here that's uncontrolled and untreated. And then picking it up in an inlet in the conventional storm drain somewhere down in through here, running a pipe and getting an easement, or maybe extending this up is another way to look at that and bringing it over and picking up a little bit sooner. So the only way to really do that is to look at a more of a detailed engineering investigation. So what we're trying to accomplish here is saying there is a potential solution that would work as broad brush, and you know, someone would come back in and dot their I's and T's and really do an engineering analysis and run the computations. So we're trying to, so like when you look at this, you could say, oh, okay, we could maybe get some grants, or we could encourage people to build this, or we could come in and grab an easement and build this part of the system. So and that's part of the narrative and part of the recommendations that are out, that'll be out of the narrative. Like for this one here, you know, here's 3 ways you could skin the cat. So
Neil, we're not seeing your diagram anymore. It's just, we're just seeing your,
really?
really?
It says I'm sharing. It says I'm screen sharing.
Does anybody else see it?
I think maybe you're sharing a different window or tab or something on your computer, Neil.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing your directory, not the diagram.
Now I really messed up because I have a great picture of Julie Abrams.
That's not possible, but thank you.
Oh yes, it's a nice picture. Let me see. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So going back to this just one more time. So picking up that drainage, maybe making it so it's not a wide river, using some making it a bioswale, so it's a little bit more attractive, maybe doing some more landscaping through here. Putting bioretention cells to help break this up, and then collecting it and putting it in an inlet, and then connecting back to the public system, or the same, maybe pick it up a little bit sooner. So you may have 2 or 3 places where you would extend the drainage system to look at that. So, you know, this is one of the rivers that kind of forms, I think, in back of the houses, and it's pretty apparent. So this would require some more engineering work. So we're trying to illustrate that there is a potential solution that's green. It could be gray, or it could be, in this case, a combination.
Yeah, and so I guess my point is, when we discussed this the other day, the cost of something like this was pretty prohibitive, I think, given even the funds that we're expecting. So the alternative might be, or perhaps it could be something done more uphill that would, you know, with the consent of the owner, maybe disperse the water earlier, or you know, so that instead of spending $350,000, maybe for, you know, 15 or 20,000, you could have a pretty good, you might not solve the problem, but you could have an impact on all those people downhill. And then each person could then do things that would, you know, conservation gardens, rain gardens, et cetera, get rid of all those big lawns there, that would have an impact.
Yeah. So if you see where my cursor is, like up near the top, those are fairly larger size lots, and they probably generate some water. So maybe some intervention up and through here. But then when you start to get into something bigger, it's going to require some easement probably. I mean, who's maintaining it? You know, those are some questions that you would have to ask. But the minute you start putting pipes in the ground, the cost goes up through the sky. And it becomes a 2 or 3 year project, and made a construction firm and some engineers real happy.
Right.
Whereas, you know, you may be able to put a get an engineer to, I mean, a homeowner to agree to put a bioretention swale in, and a bioretention cell. And then, you know, if you get 2 or 3 people to get that together, you could maybe have a fairly good effect on what happens down through these kind of lots and through here. So the closer to the source you manage it, the better typically, because then you don't have the cumulative effect.
Okay.
So I sent you, I think, 4 panels that are pretty detailed. Like I said, I think the next step is, let me get your comments back from you, and I can start writing things up. And you can
Okay.
have a plan.
Great. We will do that. Anybody else want to say anything or ask any questions?
And I would really appreciate when you send them back, if you could kind of just put them all together in one nice email, so I don't get 18 emails, because that's going to be very difficult to kind of parse through that.
Yeah, we will do that.
That would be great. I'd appreciate that. And I would like to say that you all have been, someone said that you were challenging. I got it in one of the emails. Not challenging, you're actually very helpful. My staff really appreciate, you know, we're an NGO, so we invest some time back into projects. And this is a very unique kind of a situation when you have a whole jurisdiction that wants to say, we have an issue here and we want to solve it, and we're interested in, as private property owners, and, you know, solutions that we can have to alleviate it. So in doing this for a long period of time, I haven't run into many situations like this. So we appreciate the input.
Well, thank you. And I do think that this is a unique opportunity to actually perhaps have a model for other communities. So, you know, we enjoy working with you, and hopefully we'll give you some comments, and we can move forward. Looking forward to your report.
Great, thank you. And like I said, if you have some questions or whatever, feel free to just email me. I'll get back to them.
Okay.
Typically.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or
I'm not seeing any other ones.
comments? All right, sounds good. Have a nice evening, everyone.
All right, you too. Thank you. Okay, let's see, who is next on the agenda? So now I've moved my agenda, so.
I think I might be, but you may want to confirm because I do not have it in front of me either.
I think
Sorry.
you are.
Oh, yeah, no, I am. Yeah, I am next.
Yeah, I just wrote all over the other one that was the agenda.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Go ahead.
Great, thanks. Okay, so this is regarding the trees component of Stormwater Committee, obviously. And so I'll just talk about what this will and won't address and cover. So it doesn't cover the rationale for the importance of trees. There are many things in the report, either currently or will be, that I'm not talking about tonight, just to be clear what's I'm covering. So, you know, the importance of trees in terms of root absorption, in terms of the canopy of slowing, you know, tree water, which the town arborist has also emphasized, the tree beds, which we know about, and that kind of thing is not covered in what I'm about to talk about, but that's presumed, and we'll make sure that's well covered. You know, it partly is and will be in the final report. Also, Julie very helpfully sent around the Parks and Natural Resource Committee, PNRC, language that they had worked on, and Brian and I have been in touch with Kristen Khanna, who's the chair, and that committee as well. So one thing I think for those of you who were at the last Stormwater Committee meeting, that Council Member Kabir Kumar had said that that we could also present anything related to trees that was, you know, could dovetail but did not have to completely dovetail with what the PNRC was recommending, and that what I took from that was the council is, of course, you know, super intelligent, super sophisticated, and so they can, you know, see multiple ideas and, you know, consider what makes sense. So that was helpful because I was having a little trouble kind of reconciling everything completely. So that's sort of the context of it. And so I think this is really just about trying to look at, so the point in our report is the preserving and increasing the town's tree canopy, but canopy obviously includes the tree roots, needless to say. So, and the general, you know, rationale for the role of trees, other than that we're a tree city, which is, you know, the importance of absorption of stormwater, slowing down of stormwater, in terms of the canopy itself, and then the root absorption of stormwater, and then of course our role in climate change, where what we can do. So that's, you know, I think stormwater I consider sort of micro, meaning it's local to us, and then climate change is kind of macro, bigger picture. For those of you who may have been following, you know, COP26 just happened, and you know, there's alarm bells ringing. So I think the extent, even though that is, you know, our mandate is not climate change per se, obviously it's stormwater, that's something to factor in. So this is a policy that would be in terms of there's two components regarding trees. One is, you know, can you remove it, and who gets to, and how is that done? And then there's the reforestation. So I'll talk about the reforestation at the end. The PNRC has a recommendation for both how and when to remove, and then also how to reforest, reforest. I'm just going to talk about primarily the removal policy, and then I can comment on some thoughts about the reforestation. So I have made a really simple slide. So I tried to make it accessible. The other thing I guess I'd say is, I'm not sharing, am I? Sorry, I'm looking at something that you're not. Sorry about that. I guess one thing I've been very cognizant about is we've heard for so long, at least I've been hearing, we all have, you know, that the role of waivers, you know, related to construction, et cetera. But it seems like when there's a lot of wiggle room, people in general, and I'd say Somerset in particular, because we're, pretty savvy folks, wiggle a lot. And so I in structuring this, what I was recommending, I was trying to make it pretty simple and not lots of wiggle room and not lots of interpretation, because that makes both complications, but also more room to not have what we're trying to do. And the other thing I'd say is that any decision about what trees should go, should be planted, et cetera, should always be done by a professional arborist. We of course have a town arborist, Dr. Tolbert Feather, and whomever, and I've in the past, of course, had prior people. But so any decisions would, I think this is hopefully obvious, but the decision of a classification of what's tree status is, what should be reforested, all those kind of things should be done by a professional arborist. So this is just sort of the policy, but the implementation of the opinions and things about what's what and interpretations is by a qualified professional, meaning a town arborist, meaning in our case, our town arborist. So just to be clear about that. So let's see, I'm going to share screen and see if this works. Does that work? Can you guys see my screen? Do you see a screen? Anybody? Yes, no? Can someone say, I can't hear anybody
Yes,
now?
yes,
Oh,
yes, we can
thank
see
you,
it.
sorry.
All right, we're all on mute.
Okay.
We're all reaching
That's-
around the mute.
Thank you, no, I appreciate being on mute. Okay, so, right. So this is just a really simple, so I came up with this thing. I was trying to make it a, kind of blunt instrument, and there is a decision tree involved. Sorry about the pun, it's terrible. It's late at night, you don't want puns. But anyway, it was trying to just make it really simple. So 3D and 3P, so what does that mean? So 3Ds are, so these are the reasons why one would remove a tree. And part of this, oh, are you seeing this weird text reading thing? Oh dear, I don't know if you see that, but anyway. Part of
closed captioning, it's
oh my
captioning.
gosh, gee, how do I turn that off? It's horrible. Does anyone know?
Well, it's been enabled by someone, maybe by Matt.
No, I saw it on mine, or also, hold on, I'm so sorry. Does anyone know how to turn it off?
Yeah,
I think it is on mine, but I don't know how to. Sorry about this, guys. I tested this thing, but I didn't realize that. Is it a part of view? Let's see. I've never had.
Julie, it says the meeting it says live transcription closed captioning has been enabled. It's part of Zoom.
Oh, okay. All right. So I can't deal with it. All right. No problem.
Okay,
all
let's
right.
go.
Anyway,
you can
so,
actually, if you click the 3 dots where it says more down underneath.
Are you talking in Zoom or in PowerPoint?
In Zoom.
In Zoom. Okay. Meeting controls. Wait, I don't. Oh, 3 more. Yes.
And then it says live transcript. Or it should say show subtitle or hide.
Oh, yeah.
Subtitle.
Oh, there.
If you click
Okay.
hide subtitle, it'll go away for you.
Okay. Are you seeing it now? Now I see something else on the bottom. Ugh. Sorry, guys. Do you see that at the bottom?
I think everybody has the ability to either hide it on their own screen or not.
Okay. All right. So anyway, as Brian and I had done all the tree classifications, we started to see many of the reasons why trees were removed that, weren't considered necessarily elective. And what they seemed to aggregate into were 3 buckets, which were death, meaning the tree was dead. And again, always as opinioned by the town arborist, or it had a disease which was not remediable, something that could not be cured, and therefore it was an unhealthy tree, which caused other things, and or, sorry, it was dangerous. And what does dangerous mean? So dangerous goes into what I call the 3 Ps, which are people, property, and power. And with all respect to Ed, and I hope he does better, he also mentioned pets. And I did consider adding pets, but I couldn't come up with anywhere where a pet was in danger, but no people or property or power were. I mean, even if the cat goes up a tree, that didn't quite work. But if someone has a compelling, and I'm not trying to be funny, a reason that pets should be a 4P, I'm very happy to add it. I couldn't come up with that. So, and I know we're very pro pet in town, which is great. So anyway, so these were the reasons that trees should be removed because they were either unhealthy or dead or endangering. So these would be very compelling reasons why trees should be removed. And so just so you know, so this diagram, the red circle means remove it, and the green without a red circle means you keep it. So I made decision tree. Hold on, sorry. Right now, I'm trying to get my, I'll go there. Where's the, There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. So let me get this control thing out of the way. So basically, this was just trying to show in really simple terms, I'm a resident in town. I want to remove my tree. Can I under this scenario, right? And so it goes through this decision tree. And again, this is trying to be really clear. So it's not waivers and that kind of thing, or, how valuable is a tree? Is it a trash tree or a good tree, or how old is it, or young is it, or do I like it, or do I want to build a swimming pool where the tree is, or, build a bigger house, or any of those things. It's just really straightforward and simple. And hopefully, there's hopeful, whatever Kabir said, elegance in the simplicity. We'll see. So the first question is the tree healthy? Right. And so then, of course, there's yes and no. If we go to no, because that's a simpler tree part, and here we're in the bottom, is the tree dead? And if the tree is dead, again, certified by the arborist, then that's a removal, which is red circle. If the tree is not dead, I couldn't draw this in time because I did this right after work, but this would kind of loop back to the beginning. So, if it's not dead, but nothing else, meaning it's just healthy and fine, then you'd keep the tree. If the tree is incurably diseased, and I think that again, incurably is important because I'm not an arborist expert, but I think there are tree things that are, that are beyond curing, and then there's some that could be cured. So again, if it's incurably diseased, you remove the tree. If it's not incurably diseased, you keep the tree. So that would be that. Now if the tree is healthy, right? And then you say, well, oh, okay, it's healthy. But is it dangerous? And then again, so I'll go to no, because if it's not dangerous, then keep the tree, meaning no, you don't remove the tree. If the tree is dangerous, oh, okay, well, let's drill down on that. So again, now we're into our 3 Ps, right? So people, property, power. So is it endangering people? And that would be, things like it's, leaning over a sidewalk and people walk their dog past there every day, or it's somehow gonna, could be, where you walk in your driveway and you go out every day to not near the car, but just walking there. So, so you don't want a tree that people are concerned that they're gonna be endangered. It's gonna fall on them, that kind of thing. Or it's, very weak and wobbly. Is a tree endangering property? Of course, a house is one important piece of property. Also, cars in your driveway, cars that park in front of your house, that kind of thing. And so if it was endangering, property, this happened with neighbor across the, 2 doors down. One neighbor's tree, the other neighbor was sure was endangering their house and was leaning too much to the neighbor's house, even though it wasn't on the neighbor's property. They asked them to remove it. That's an example. Is a tree endangering power? For those of you who've lived near here for some time, we used to have many, many, many more power outages than we currently do. And Pepco did a pretty severe tree trimming because the tree branches and that kind of thing were often leaning on power lines, and during storms that was problematic. So this is again removal. And sometimes the trees were just trimmed, and that this is not tree trimming. This is removal. So in the cases where the tree itself was fundamentally couldn't just be trimmed, it was endangering power lines. That is people could argue if that's correct or not, but in my personal opinion and whatever, and Pepco clearly thought so. They did it. So there are cases where trees, a whole tree is actually endangering power lines. I think those were mostly done because I know we had quite a lot of removals for that reason.
Hey, Julie, can I interrupt you? We don't have a
Please.
whole lot of time.
Okay,
here.
all right, I'm almost done. Okay, very good. I'll wrap up. Okay.
Hold on a second. I have a question for you.
Oh, sure.
Because a couple of things you said, I'm not an expert, but I've certainly planted a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Have you run this by an arborist? Because I would imagine the town would rather have a new healthy maple or oak than a trash tree that is not going to, provide much canopy. It seems to me that what the tree is ought to have some bearing on whether the tree is removed and replaced. But
Right, so I talked about it with Tolbert, Dr. Feather. We did talk about it. One thing I'd say about trash trees, and I specifically asked about that, and I said, what's your opinion about, what's a trash tree or not, et cetera. And he, he's an arborist. He said he doesn't use that categorization. I mean, he does greatly value canopy trees, for obvious reasons, I think. But he wouldn't, say, oh, just remove it because it's a trash tree, or preserve it because it's not a trash tree. And trash trees have, there's certain species that are some people consider trash trees. He doesn't believe that much in that. He also actually isn't as compellingly speaks of native species only. He said with climate change that actually what's a native species may change over time as well. What he said is, I mean, he doesn't think trees removed for no reason. He did say, and this is true, this is going to be my final point, is that making this decision, I mean, partly it's stormwater and climate, but it's also political in the sense of are people willing to do it? That's what and he said that will be the biggest challenge, frankly. So I mean, he obviously likes having trees. He's not a fan of just removing them for no reason, but he recognizes that it's political in the sense of people's will decision. So, but he, just so he's not. It doesn't do this trash is a trash tree. It's not a trash tree. I mean, the other thing I will, can add to the report is, I mean, Brian raised this in the report about, what if you do like a 3-for-1 swap or something, but, we can show just numerically, the diameter of a tree and how long it takes to add diameter of the trunk, and therefore the roots absorb a certain amount of water, and like how long does it take to get back to even that size. And the other thing I guess I'd say is, based on all the things Brian and I found, we're getting rid of lots of trees because we have to. So that's a given. And so, do we also want to do what I'm calling elective, meaning they don't fit into this? So that's, did that answer your question? I mean, I did talk about this with Tolbert actually before I presented anything, obviously. And he's not the political will person. He thinks trees are very helpful.
Julie, maybe I could say something there, because actually I'm
please.
the PNRC liaison and work on the development of guidelines there, which I think you've seen.
Yeah. Robin, can I just give a comment about the PNRC first, or if you want to first? Go ahead, you can do it. I was going to make a comment about that, but go ahead, go for it, please.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, their guidelines, which council had to first look at the work session the other day, emphasize very much the quality of the tree, which is kind of Ellen's point too. And, imagine a 40-inch oak tree, okay, and the size of its canopy is huge. Its roots are also massively spread around the yard. Compare that with a mature cherry tree, which has got a much smaller trunk and a much smaller canopy. Obviously, the oak tree is going to be doing a lot more control of runoff and slowing down of water coming down than the cherry tree is. So there really is an important difference for stormwater in the quality of the tree. So what I'm trying to say is look at PNRC's guidelines and ask from that how you would modify them to emphasize stormwater control or runoff control. I think that's probably the best way of doing it. They have gone beyond the idea of a tree is a tree is a tree, which is kind of what Ellen was saying, and that was what she was concerned about with the way you had put it.
No, very, very much noted, and did look at those very carefully. I guess one concern, and maybe this is more the political issue, is that my concern, and I mean, obviously this is just I'm proposing it, so we haven't approved it by this committee by any stretch, but it just seemed the more options and interpretations there were, the more wiggle room there was, and I don't want to have so much wiggle room that everyone's going to try to wiggle out, and I guess that was one concern. The other thing I wanted to say is that the PNRC talks about both removal and then also reforestation. I thought the reforestation plans make a ton of sense in terms of what we should do. One thing I haven't quite figured out, and I don't know the answer to this issue along for many things we're proposing, is the bandwidth for the town to monitor, to oversee, to make sure, enforce, et cetera. And right now I know, based on everything Brian and I looked into, the town currently wouldn't have the ability to make sure that the reforestation would be done as proposed, because, that hasn't been happening particular, or we don't even know if it's exactly happening. And so the reforestation plan sounds great, and we may or may not need to make an opinion about that, but I guess I'm just trying to think what can be proposed that's realistic. I don't think we should create some monstrous bureaucracy by the town to do all this stuff, but that's just one concern that Brian, I noticed, like the bandwidth for the whole reforestation of any type, at least as
We just
currently.
keep our massive police force going and inspect, right?
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
No, no,
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
can repurpose. Yeah.
You
So
have
anyway,
we have to rely on the goodwill of residents to do what they've agreed to do when they signed off on the plan. There are occasionally misbehaving ones, but it's pretty rare. Most of the time, people do, in fact, what they've said that they'll do. I mean, what I see, I looked at one of the new homes that we'd approved, and I looked at the trees they'd put in, and the trees they put in are there. They're real. It's just they're tiny. And what went out were two massive trees in this particular home's case. And I know that's been a loss for the canopy and a loss for stormwater, but when that's happened, and maybe it'll be a recovery in 20 years or 40 years, but it's not recovered now. So having a tighter control over tree removal is important, but also making sure the quality of the tree is part of the argument, I think, is important too.
yeah. I mean, I guess if there's a way to make it simpler, I mean, I've talked to Kristen, et cetera. It just seems like we've got a lot of nuance going, and that's great, but it just, I don't know, maybe I'm too cynical about Somerset, but I just feel like people are going to take those, all that complexity and use it to their advantage. That's my concern, frankly. But,
I mean, the way they've written the guidelines, and again, I thought it was a good thought, and it was actually Seema Eslam is her name, who is a lawyer.
The lawyer, yeah.
Drafted it as mitigating and aggravating factors, or aggravating and mitigating factors. In other words, it's a complex decision when you decide to give permission for someone to remove a tree, and there isn't a simple yes, no. So you give the council factors to weigh, and that let the council make the decision. That's how PNRC constructed it. We still send it back to them for another reason. I can get to that in a minute, but
looks like right. Okay. No, thank you, Robin. Yeah.
Sorry, is this it, Julie? Can we move on, or are you going?
Yeah, well, I'm done, but Brian has his hand up, so I thought
okay.
he should speak.
Well, no, I was just curious. I did not make my way through the PNRC recommendations, but Robin, you talked about reforestation, but what was the consequence for making a distinction between trees for the decision to remove a tree? Was it easier? Is it under those guidelines easier to remove a quote unquote trash tree than a different tree? Or
yeah, it is easier to remove a trash tree. In other words, what they say, the first aggravating factor is the tree a major tree? In other words, is it something that is recognized as important to the town, important stormwater? And that's getting exactly at, is it a trash tree or not?
Right. Uniqueness, rarity, size, status as a native canopy or landmark tree is determined by the arborist. Number of trees removed from the subject lot within a 5-year period, the risk posed to stormwater in the immediate area and the town in general by removal of a tree. I mean, I guess I was just picturing the town council having to look at all this for every tree removal, and it just sounded
well, we're considering it. No, actually, we thought we could do that, which may be naive of our council. We did send it back to them on the language around dangerous trees. And the reason is that is a true wiggle. In other words, a tree could be called dangerous or threatening loosely to get rid of it. And so we're asking for better guidance on how to handle that.
Yeah, and we did see that as the reason for removals for many, many trees. And who knows, I don't always know what it meant. I know Brian did either, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, Ellen, if you want to have this debate now or move on to something else.
No, I don't. I think we need to move on because
because there are other issues to
way over,
consider.
and this is the first time that I've seen it, so I think it's everybody's seen it, and we can hash it out later. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Julie. Can we move on to Haya and the resources?
Sorry, had to turn myself back on. I'm here. Okay. So what we're doing is we're getting together a table. We're trying to get together the resources for the final report. And initially we envisioned having Like, we thought, oh, we'd have a list of contractors, and now we realize that that is not appropriate at all. But what we do want to give people is a list of a description of all the possible types of installations. And this is kind of what we had on our PowerPoint, rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavers, all those things. And we'll have a list of them, and we'll explain them. We'll have diagrams, we'll have photos, and price. And then we will also have, so we'll have that organized, and then we'll also just put a few websites that sort of, for example, Rainscapes, which refer people to everything. Rainscapes can give them contractors, and also Rain Plan. And there's a place called the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Organization or something like that, which certifies professionals, but they also have lists of professionals that you can go to. So that's a very interesting thing in this area. But that's about it. We're working on that right now.
Great. So we can just refer them to people who refer experts, right? We're referring people to organizations that refer other experts.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Talk to people. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Any questions for Haya? Nope. Okay. All right. I'd like to move on. Julie, you want to take the lead on the draft? I hope everybody has looked at and read the entire draft, and the purpose of what we're going to do now is to kind of talk about what may be missing, or parts or gaps or things we want to add. I have some thoughts, but Julie, do you want to start it off?
Well, this is a joint effort that is at this point uneven. There's probably more material on some things that needs to be there, and there's probably scant information on others. I think we need to worry less about the unevenness and more about the holes. As I see it, we have some recommendations that are being formulated. We're not there with them, but we know the rationale for those recommendations. We have a sense that that the town as a whole, for example, needs to focus not just on new home construction, even though in the survey we did, people did think that was a big problem in terms of runoff. But this committee has decided, no, we want to have a broader focus. We want to consider all types of additions of impervious surface. And we also want to convey the understanding that even if a home is not modified, even if it just sits there year after year, it is not blameless in creating runoff, that there's runoff coming from surfaces that aren't the roof, and the roof runoff is going to the stream, and that's can be an issue. So we have these thoughts in our head that are the rationales for what we're addressing, and the explanations for why we want people to keep their expectations within bounds, that we can't solve some problems and we aren't recommending we solve them. And all of that to me is what we have to make sure is there in the material we're looking at right now. You didn't need to look at the recommendations, you could read through them, but we certainly aren't there. And the appendices are obviously sort of extraneous at this point. But the question is, do we cover that kind of issue? Do we make the case? It's not just new homes. Do we make the case that if there's a house that isn't even modified in the slightest, and you're sitting as a resident in that house, you can't smugly say, well, I'm not creating any of these problems. We want people to understand, the nuances here. So with that, that's what I hope people sort of said, oh my gosh, we're not really making the case that it's just new homes. We really haven't made that case. We better say X, Y, and Z. And that's what I hope people have some thoughts about tonight. And if you haven't quite formulated your thoughts, they're still being formulated, that you provide that information. Now, don't go into the report at this point and start moving stuff around and adding stuff. I think the thing to do is to just identify and say, you know, on page 17, we just aren't really conveying this point, and let's identify it in pretty, you know, sort of minimal terms, and then we'll go back and say, well, what would do a better job of conveying that? So I'm sitting here with my pencil and or pen and paper, happy to take down anything and then, you know, start working with that on the next draft. I really do not feel a sense of ownership of this, so that if anybody wants to, you know, once we did this in pieces before, if there's something that has to be added and it's sort of your area, you're welcome to go back in there and flesh stuff out.
I think I'd like to say a few things. First of all, your effort has been heroic, because I know how it's hard. It's like herding cats to get people, me included, to get people to write their sections. And I really want to thank Julie in particular for keeping the ball rolling, because she really has been the person who has made what we have happen. My sense, and just reading, I read the whole thing straight through, was that there are a few holes, and we can talk about that, but I think a lot of it is because we haven't, even though we've discussed a lot of recommendations, we really haven't figured out what those recommendations, how they're going to look. I think we know what the goals are and what we're trying to achieve, but what's realistic and how do we phrase it, but that will come. I think we're pretty close. I think the one thing that I think, or a couple things that I think are missing, are sort of, you know, what the kind of the history of the mandate of the committee, what we wanted to do, how we did it, how we, you know, organized ourselves, did our research, the survey, et cetera, and then the things that we have created, which I think is helpful in terms of the, I mean, I didn't see any mention of the rain garden day, you know, the resources. I think maybe there was one site that's being put together. You know, the map in terms of where I mean, the map was in there, but more of how did we get here and how did we do the research and where are we going with it? And then also, I think at the beginning, what were our goals and what were we trying to accomplish? And I think one of the most important points, and I think you made that early on, Julie, and as did others, is that we want to get in at the beginning of the process. Because a lot of the problems in the past have been that by the time people are focused on something, it's too late. And that rather than be hostile, we want to be cooperative. We want to work with builders and new homeowners and not be seen as somebody who comes in at the end and says, you can't do that. And then of course they can do it because they already have, you know, they've got the county permit or whatever. So I think some of the more generalized goals, I think are important, and maybe we want to put those more at the beginning, what we were seeking.
And thinking about equity, I think and simplicity, we should
simplicity, yes.
Equity, I think that's good, sort of our overarching goals.
And the recognition that, you know, we are a small community. We don't have a lot of overhead in town. So having something that people understand that appears to be fair and can be enforced without so much, you know, cost and, you know, difficulty for not only the homeowner, but whoever is going to make sure that that people comply. And that the ultimate goal is what we're trying to do is make this a more livable place. And then if I could just, one last thing is, you know, there are communal or community-wide solutions, and then there was individual. And I think we want to work on both. We want to find those places that we can work to solve a lot of people's, you know, like a group of people's problems, but at the same time, every homeowner can do something on their property. So, I mean, so I'm sorry I talked too long, but those were just sort of my thoughts. Anybody else?
No, those were fantastic, actually. So Julie, just more procedurally, so you said not to add, so that you want it for, I know where you're doing comments, which I think is good because it keeps the document clean, but in the document to do comments what's, missing or that, or like this kind of,
Well-
eloquent statement. We should have just taped Ellen and transcribed it, but anyway.
Well, if there is if there are pieces that are in your original sort of assignment and you want to expand on them, that's fine. The document's there, anybody can work on it. What I'm saying is if now someone says, oh, I want to write about these overarching goals, because that is a whole, and that sounded really, I'm really energized by the thought of doing that. Just hold off on that. Maybe it should be written separately, because we don't know where that's going to fit. It probably is in the beginning, but just come up with a separate draft, and then we will fit it in, because otherwise we're going to have, now I don't know that there's really a great organization, but at least everybody knows the order of where things are, whether they're in ultimately the right place. So, feel free to do something on our process. In fact, I think Ed was starting to work on the process the committee took to come to at least the code changes. But let's keep those sort of segregated. And then Julie, I know you were going to write in, put more in about trees. Well, fine, where the tree section is, go ahead and add it. It's just, that's not new, that's just expansion. So, but if anybody has any more thoughts, just like Ellen did, you can send those, either talk about it tonight or send them in an email and say, oh, I just thought of something we should add to our overarching goals. And we'll just, I'll catalog that, or maybe I'll create, I don't know, I think we should do. I think, what if I create some new sort of separate drafts in that folder that says, one is going to be their mandate, one is going to be all the sort of what we've created. I think there we should also put in, we came up with this idea for this RFP and connect what we're doing with this center's work. I'll create these separate little briefs with a title of if people want to write about them, we know that that's a hole that's going to be filled, and you can start writing on that separate, document in that same folder. You'll see.
So also
you'll see
Google
it. It'll all make
Docs,
sense.
Google Docs, so they're also still shared.
Yeah, it'll all be in
docs.
the same
Yeah.
folder. It'll all be for the report, but we'll have separate docs for these things that we've identified as new pieces of the report.
I think that's great. I think that there's so much in the draft. Julie, I put comments in the Google Doc
That's fine.
in various places. But I guess, and I agree with everything that's been said so far in terms of how to improve it. To me, it reads very much right now like sort of almost like mostly like a background document.
Yeah.
I realize that the recommendations are not final and they're at the end, but even so, kind of our thread in terms of like, here's what the problem is, the key points of the problem. Here are the current efforts to address that and why they fall short, and therefore here are our recommendations. That thread isn't quite clear throughout. Like, it's not clear what we actually think the most important problem
Right.
for the community is, and that's got to fit under what Ellen was saying as well, which is what is our goal after all, right? So our goal isn't to manage stormwater. I mean, I know that's our goal, but there's something above that, right? Like, why are we doing that? What do we hope to achieve? Is it about climate change? Is it about property values? Is it about something else? That should be, I think, evident to people as well, because then it motivates all the solutions that come after that. So I guess just to reiterate, that thread for me is not quite coming through.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be, I'm a big believer in an overall outline. And I think if we had sort of a not too complicated, because I think most of the pieces are there. I mean, obviously the recommendations aren't there yet, but a lot of the background is indeed there, and the information. I think if we had an outline that sort of stated who we are, why are we here, how did we approach this, what were our goals, what did we find, what are we recommending? And if we sort of, I mean, that's a simplistic way. It obviously needs to be better than that. I think it would all become much clearer, and you could just kind of move the pieces around based on something like that. Because I think a lot of the work, more is there than you think. I just think it needs to be rearranged a little, take out a little redundancy, and then come in with the more global, why did we do this? And what did we accomplish? And then, and then maybe a section on what individual homeowners can do, and then what the community as a whole could do.
Ellen, I know at some point there was our original mandate, which is pretty straightforward, a paragraph or something, but where is
that? That's on our, I have it right here. That's what I was looking at earlier today.
Yeah, because that would be great to include like verbatim, right? I mean.
Well, it's very simple. It's on the town website underneath our committee. If you hit what the mandate is.
Okay, so that's where it was.
You can just print it out. And I think I reread it today, just thinking, oh, did we do? And we kind of did everything, so it's great. So, anybody else with any ideas, thoughts? Does anybody want to take a stab at the outline? I can do that, or if somebody else wants to volunteer organizationally.
Well, I think you should do it. I don't think you're going to be happy with the report unless you do the outline.
That's not true at all.
No, I think that's only fair.
Okay, well, maybe I'll, everybody's voting.
All in favor of Ellen doing the outline, say aye, right? Aye.
Okay, all right, well, I'll take a crack at it. And I think it does help if you read it and then think about it. I'm a person who likes to think about things for a few days. So now that I've got it in my head, I was taking notes and kind of listening to what everybody else had to say. So I hopefully can get something done by this weekend. Anyway, does anybody else have anything else? I think we're through our agenda.
Let me just bring up what council's working on just now, which is code for accessory additional dwelling units, on the accessory dwelling units on the town ADUs. And the thing we're requiring really is a parking spot for the person who's going to be resident in the ADU. And so people have started worrying about stormwater management for ADUs under those circumstances. And that they started coming up with council. I said, oh, the stormwater committee's handling that. So basically, I think Neil has it already in his suggestions. Any accessory buildings, then you include stormwater considerations for those. Any new driveways need to be permeable. So I think it's all there, but just make sure it's there with bearing in mind ADUs, because we're putting code in for them.
We can do that. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. And
thank you all. You're doing great work. You really are.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Good night, everybody.
See ya.
Everybody, thanks.
Good night.